Okay, so there are certain things that came up today and downloaded to me that I consider to be relevant to the conversation that we're having here, and so I want to speak about them. You could call these things that I'm speaking about distinctions. One of my teachers used that word to describe a very important aspect of the process of learning. You could say that learning involves creating distinctions, or learning involves discovering distinctions, and when you have more distinctions, you have more specific understanding of things. For example, a dentist, when you and I look in a person's mouth, we see teeth. A dentist looks in somebody's mouth and they see a lot more than teeth, right? Because they have a lot more distinctions about a mouth than we do. You know, they see the health of the gums, they see, you know, very distinctive differences in the teeth and what was filled and what kind of filling was in there and whether there's caps on the teeth and, you know, all that, right? So that's distinctions. As a psychologist, when I sit down and talk to somebody, I don't see what most other people would see when they sit down and talk to somebody. I've been trained to make many more distinctions about what I'm looking at, right? So I'm looking at their facial expressions, their body language, their eyes. I'm looking at the specific words they're using. I'm looking at their emotional state. I'm looking at how much tension they seem to be experiencing. I'm looking to see how much understanding they're having. I'm looking to see how reactive they are. I'm looking to see whether we're connected. So I have a whole body of distinctions that come from practicing doing psychological therapy with people that other people don't have. Right? And so one of the ways that we can talk about this work and this conversation we're having here is that you're developing, learning, or discovering new distinctions. Another way of saying this is that you're learning concepts. Concepts are distinctions, right? And it's very important to understand that whether it's me or any teacher you've ever heard, including Buddha, Jesus, Mohammed, whoever, whatever any teacher is saying is conceptual. Whatever any teacher is saying are concepts. They are not the truth. And that's a distinction that a lot of people don't have. A lot of people take what is being said to be the truth, right, without understanding that concepts are not the truth, right? And that can lead to misunderstandings. That can lead to blind faith. That can lead to people believing in things that aren't true, and that can get to the point where they're willing to die for a belief. Right? That happens, right? Look around the world, right? They die for a belief. They die for a belief. And so a belief and a concept are not the truth. They're understandings that are based on what you hear and what your mind processes to be an understanding that seems to make sense to you. It's an intellectual understanding of something. Now, in terms of what we're talking about here, because it is so radical and because it's asking you to consider things that are so radical, right? It's radical, right? I mean, where have you ever come across anybody who's telling you that you're not your body, or telling you that you don't think your thoughts, right? These are pretty radical concepts, right? Or even worse, telling you that everything's predetermined. You know, that'll hit a wall when it comes to understanding, right? Or telling you that you have no free will. That'll hit a wall when it comes to your previous beliefs and understanding, right? And so it's very important to understand that if the concepts make sense to you, if you agree with the concepts, if you see the validity of the concepts, right? If they resonate with you, and you're receptive to the concepts, that it's very important to take the next step, right? Which is to then take that concept and personally investigate the evidence for the validity of that concept. Personally investigate. For example, if I say to you, well, you don't have any free will, right? That's a concept, right? I can give you examples of that make it seem like the concept is valid, right? But that's still so unlike your ordinary moment-to-moment experience that in itself isn't going to do much, right? But if you then take that concept and you examine things as they occur, for example, if you take that concept and you look and see something that you're clear that is an example of your having free will, something that you're clear that is an example of you're the source of something, that you're the doer, that you actually did something, you're the source, it came from you, right? If you actually look at a specific instance of that and then follow it back in terms of the sequence of events, what you'll have to come up with is that prior to any action you take, there's a thought about doing that action, yes? Yes. And if it's true that the thoughts that occur in your mind are not your thoughts, which is another concept that I've talked about here, right? And I've given you evidence for that, right? I've said if your thoughts are your thoughts, right, stop thinking. If they're your thoughts, just stop thinking. When it's time to go to sleep at night, just stop thinking, right? Or if thoughts are your thoughts, only think the thoughts that are useful and realistic. Don't think negative thoughts. Don't think negative thoughts about yourself. Right? Don't think thoughts that create stress for you, right? Well, obviously, if you just take into consideration what I'm talking about, you will see, conceptually speaking, you will see that makes a lot of sense, right? But until you actually look at your own experience of thinking and recognize that when you have a thought, or when you think you have a thought, right, that what happens is the thought appears in your mind, you look and see the thought, and then you call it my thought. But you didn't know what the thought was until it happened and you looked to see it. Therefore, you must not have caused it, right? If you actually look and see that's true in your experience, then the evidence is now what's producing your conclusion, not the concept. Do you understand? This is very important, right? In all of these things, it's very important. You could have, for example, the idea that the Earth is flat as a concept, and believe it or not, there are people around today that believe the Earth is flat. There is a flat Earth society today. That just shows you how blind beliefs can be, right? However, if you're one of those people and I take you in a space capsule above the Earth's atmosphere, and I point to the Earth and I see, what do you see? You can't deny that it's round, can you? Right? The evidence will then speak for what the truth is, right? Of course, people can even deny the evidence, right? But at least if you take a personal interest in looking to see what the evidence says, that's good enough for you to take the next step, which is to now act on what you have understood to be a concept. And that's important because unless you act on what we're talking about here in terms of incorporating into your moment-to-moment existence, it's a waste of time. It's not going to make any difference. You're not going to suffer any less. You're not going to be less neurotic. You're not going to be more happy, right? It's got to come to that. It's got to come to you apply. This is enlightenment in action, not enlightenment just as a concept that you're waiting to God to strike you to be enlightened, and then you can put flowers at your feet, put a robe on, and have people, be devoted to you. That's nonsense, okay? But just to show you how crazy it is, right? In spite of the fact that it sounds crazy to most people that the Earth is flat, right? I came across something the other day. This really cracked me up, and I can't get it out of my mind. I keep bringing it up to my wife. That was a statement, right? I think I saw it on Facebook that there was an announcement made by the Flat Earth Society that said the Flat Earth Society has centers globally. And I promise you, the person that said that didn't even recognize what they were saying. The Flat Earth Society has centers globally. So, this whole business about concepts is very important, and therefore I am saying to you, especially you who have been coming to this, or you out there who have been listening or watching the videos, look and see where you're at about these things. If you understand the concepts and you agree with the concepts, have you and will you take it to the next step and actually examine it for yourself to see directly what the evidence says? Because it's by the examination of the evidence that your brain will change. It's by the examination of the evidence that your neural patterns will start to reorganize themselves in relationship to what the evidence says, right? So that's why it's important to do that, because changing the brain is important here. This is not 2,500 years ago. I am not the Buddha. This is now, and we have neuroscience, and we know that you can change your brain to become an enlightened brain. And if you have an enlightened brain, you have an enlightened life. And if you have an enlightened life, you don't suffer. You're happy. It's a natural state. So this is very important. Now, so now I have some new concepts for you, right? Because my interest is having these mystical ideas that can seem esoteric be understandable and applicable, right? And so one of the things that is important to understand here is, how does your neurosis get produced? Okay? How do you end up continuing to be lost, confused, and suffering and feeling stuck? How does that happen? Especially once you learn these concepts and you understand it's possible not to be crazy. It's possible not to suffer, right? And so it would behoove you then to look more closely at, well, exactly what happens when that happens, right? And one of the things that I came across not too long ago was a description of the mental process by Ramesh Balsekar that is very clear and very useful, and that's one of the things that he does, is he helps people to see more clearly and more distinctly exactly what enlightenment looks like in application, in practice, right? So one of the things he says about thinking is there's basically two kinds of thinking, right? There's the working mind and the thinking mind, okay? And it's the distinction is relatively simple. The working mind is when thoughts that occur are directly related and necessary for the action that you're taking. Thoughts that occur are directly relevant, realistic, and necessary for the actions that you're taking. That's the working mind, okay? So if you're on a computer and you're typing something on a word processor, that's the working mind. You're focusing your attention on the task at hand, and you have to do that in order to do what you're doing. That's the working mind. The thinking mind is after you take an action, the voice in your head says, did I do the right thing? Oh, I'm worried about maybe I didn't do the right thing. Maybe it's too late to change it now. Oh my God, if it's the wrong thing, what did I do? There'll be consequences. That's an example of the thinking mind. The thinking mind takes a thought or takes an emotional experience that gets triggered. So you don't have any control over the triggering process, right? The stimulus response. You don't have any choice about if something happens and triggers a reaction in your brain. You don't get to choose that. You don't get to choose how you feel, do you? No, it happens. It just happens. You don't even get to choose the thought that goes along with how you feel when you're triggered, right? Something happens and you get angry, right? And when you get angry, there's an angry thought associated with the emotion, right? That just happens, okay? That's a reaction that the brain's having to what's happening, okay? That's gonna happen. It's mechanical. There's nothing you, me, or anybody can do about that, right? But after it happens, and you're angry, and then the thoughts come behind that say, and not only that person has always been a pain in my ass, and I'm going to have to do something about them, and they're making me crazy, and I need a drink, and not only that, but now I'm miserable, and the dog better not get in my way or he'll get kicked, and I don't want to have any bullshit from my wife tonight because I've had a tough day. That's the thinking mind. right? And most of the activity that goes on for people is the thinking mind. Most of the activity that goes on for people is the thinking mind. In the neural brain science, they talk about this as the wandering mind. That's the wandering mind, right? When it's not necessary for you to be thinking specifically about an action that you're taking, what happens? You start thinking about last night, last year, yesterday, tomorrow, how you feel right now, what you want, what you don't want, what somebody just said to you, right? That's the wandering mind, right? And as the neuroscientists say, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Because the wandering mind or the thinking mind is the ego thinking. It's the you that you think you are as a person who lives in time, who has a story, who's living in a drama, and that thinking mind is the narrative of the drama, your judgments, your evaluations, your fears, your anger, your frustration, constantly playing over and over about everything that ever happens, everything that has happened and everything that will happen. And that's called being crazy. That's called being crazy, right? So this distinction between the thinking mind and the working mind is a useful distinction, but only if you then understand how to deal with it. Because the first thing, I was talking to a client of mine today about this, and the first thing out of his mouth was, well, tell me how to control the thinking mind. That's the thinking mind. That's the thinking mind, right? It's a comment, right, about the mind, right? How do I control the thinking mind? I'm not very good at that. This is very frustrating. I don't understand what you think. If you pay attention to your own mind, that's what's going on a lot of the time. Even as you sit here and listen to me, right? Your listening is not an open listening. It's not an open reception to what I'm saying. Your listening is a process. As you listen to me, the voice in your head is saying, oh, I agree with that. Oh, that doesn't make any sense to me. Oh, I don't agree with that. I don't remember. What are you just? I'm not paying attention. This is the process that's going on, right? It's the mechanical, automatic way that people listen, right, that keeps them from getting the information that's being communicated, because it's getting processed. Instead of the information coming in pure and clean, it's getting processed by the mind, the thinking mind, as to whether or not you understand it, you agree with it, you like it, you don't like it, you want to remember it, you want to forget it. Like that, on and on and on. The ego is using the mind. That's the thinking mind. The person, the ego, is using the mind to think. And the person is using the mind to think from the perspective of a separate physical body and a separate self. That's the setup. And then it's using the mind to think that way, right? That's where the neurotic stuff comes in. When you learn the concept, when you learn that you are not the person, you are not the ego, right? You have an ego, but you're not an ego. And you will always have an ego until the body dies, but you're not an ego, right? When you learn that, the possibility becomes available for you to be receptive to something outside of the thinking mind. That's what Einstein said. He said, I didn't come up with the theory of relativity, it came to me. Right? So one of the values of being open and receptive, and as they say in Zen, having a beginner's mind, is that you understand that the listening that occurs automatically is one that's going to process everything, and by processing everything based on your conditioning and your judgments and evaluations, it's going to turn away information that could be very valuable and useful. Right? But if you understand that, right, then the possibility exists for you to be receptive and open for information that's coming from beyond that system. But then it goes back to what I said before. How do you do that, right? How do you do that, right? And the first thing people will come up with, the first thing your thinking mind will come up with is, how do I do that? And then tell me how to do that so I can do that to control the thinking mind. And the thing the ego and the mind wants you to do the most is try and control it. That will guarantee that it succeeds. That will guarantee anything you try and resist will persist. I've said this before. Check it out. Anything you try and control will control you. Anything you try to control is controlling you. Right? So how do you deal with it then, right? This is very important. This is one of these key things, right? How do you deal with it? You don't deal with it. That's how you deal with it. You simply be aware of it. The awareness and the understanding of what's going on will naturally deal with it. The awareness and the understanding of what's going on will naturally deal with it, and the thinking mind will recede in the background, and the working mind will come forward. And you'll be aware with the understanding that the thinking mind is not realistic and not useful, and therefore you will lose interest in it. Those thoughts will simply become irrelevant. Those thoughts will become thoughts that you snicker at, that you will smile about. The same thoughts that in the past were making you crazy. And this process of the thinking mind is insidious. It's operating all the time if you pay attention to it. If you pay attention to it, it's operating all the time. I was here the other day working out, and I was coming down the steps to leave, and there was this little kid in front of me. If you pay attention, you'll see this in your own experience. There was this little kid in front of me, and he had a mask in his hand, and he's going down the steps in front of me, and my thinking mind is saying, oh, why don't this kid move, for Christ's sake? Why do these kids have to be in front of people like this, you know? And then he drops the mask, and the thinking mind says, look, see, you're right. He's so goddamn clumsy, he can't even walk down the steps. He drops the mask. Then he takes a few more steps and he drops it again, and the thinking mind says, see, you're right. He is that goddamn clumsy, he can't even walk down the steps. This is all in about 10 seconds. Now, most of us won't even notice that that's the thinking mind. You'll just think that's you thinking. You'll feel annoyed about this innocent little kid who did nothing. Right? That's an example of the thinking mind. When you're driving a car, right, and you have all the reactions that you have about all the people driving cars around you, that's the thinking mind. All you need to do to drive the car, right, the working mind is the mind driving the car, right? It knows this is the gas, that's the brake, this is the speedometer, right? That's the working mind, right? But that, for most people, falls into the background because you know how to drive a car, you don't have to think about it. So the thinking mind will be in the front, right? And the thinking mind will have you, while you're driving your car, driving yourself crazy at the same time. First you have the understanding, and it's a conceptual understanding, right? And then you do what I just said. Pay attention and see that it's not just a concept. Aerodynamics is not just a concept, right? You could say in relationship to gravity, as they did before planes flew, right? You can't fly something that heavy. That's not going to fly. You can't lift that off the ground. And everybody accepted that that's probably true. Seemed to make sense, right? How can something that heavy get off the ground? Then the conceptual theory of aerodynamics came into play, and it was a theory that said that conceptually speaking, it's possible for that to happen. So that they did the math, right? And came up with the aerodynamic theory, and guess what? Very heavy planes are flying 500 miles an hour, 30,000 feet. Right? Same thing here, right? We're not talking about absolute truth, because one of the things a lot of these philosophical assholes do with concepts is they say, it's a concept. It's a concept. All concepts are just concepts, and beyond concepts, we can't know anything. There's no absolute truth, and they're just concepts, so it's meaningless. That's a philosophical asshole. Because concepts, when they're put into a functional application, are valuable, are they not? Yes, it's valuable. The concept of your psychological health is a concept. It doesn't exist anywhere, does it? You can't put your finger on your psychological health, but it's goddamn important to understand, isn't it? Yeah, and the same thing is true with everything that we're saying here. And the truth of it is important, and the application of it is important, and the understanding of it is important, and the pursuit of the evidence is important. Why? Because if it is true, it's like I've said here before, if what I'm saying is true, if what Christ said is true, if what the Buddha said is true, if what the brain scientists are saying is true, your goddamn life is on the line. Right? Whether or not you experience being happy in this lifetime is on the line. Whether or not you experience being able to function effectively and skillful in the way you live your life is on the line. Completely on the line. And there are people who are so locked into their absolute belief about money will make you happy that they can't let that go. And as long as they're stuck in that belief, they're not receptive or available to hear these teachings. Right? They're out there walking around right now. Right? And there are other people who live below the poverty line that are struggling every day to make enough money to feed themselves and their kids and keep their house. Right? They're not going to be receptive to this either. They're too busy surviving. But you people and most other people who have stability and comfort and have the necessities to survive can hear this message, right? But only if you're not locked into the belief systems and the mental state of the two groups that I just mentioned. And then there are people that are in the middle, right? That are kind of interested and they're kind of, but you can tell who they are because they'll listen and they'll shake their heads in agreement, right? But then they'll argue. And the arguing is more pervasive than the agreement. And for those people, what I say, if you find yourself in that position, get yourself resolved one way or the other. Otherwise, you're in purgatory. Otherwise, you're in no man's land. Get yourself resolved one another. Either get it resolved so you do understand and accept the concepts and you are willing to pursue a direct understanding that comes from the evidence, or go bowling, for Christ's sake. Why waste your energy with this? Why waste your energy? You know what I mean? It's like, why waste your energy talking to somebody who is going to argue with you about everything that you're saying? If you're at a party and you start to talk to people about this, and any of you who have done that, who have attempted to do that, probably have found out what I'm about to say. You talk to people about this, and they're in one of the groups that I just mentioned, they'll look at you like, what? What do you mean? That doesn't make any sense. Well, what are you studying? Or they'll tell you what they believe and what they think to trump what you just said. And if you run into that and you understand anything, don't keep talking. This is not sales. This is not sales. I am not a blues brother on a mission from God. This is not sales. That's why they say when it comes to teaching meditation or teaching these teachings, teach these teachings to those who want to hear it. Right? That's why if somebody comes into this class and they've never been here before and they start listening to what I'm saying, I can tell by their face. Their face goes blank like, what the hell is this? What the hell did I get myself into? That's why I will be saying here in the future, after we do our meditation practice, right? I will say, especially if there's a new face in the room, right? The second part of this is a talk about the teachings that are the fundamental reason that meditation was invented. However, if you just came to learn to meditate and get the basic ideas about practicing meditation, that part is over now. So you can leave. There's no point in your staying unless you're curious. And even if you stay and you're curious, and after 10 or 15 minutes, you're lost, and you're having a negative reaction and you want to go home, it's fine to get up and leave. Right? This is not pressure sales. Right? There is not going to be a time here where I say it's time for you to sign up. There's nothing to sign up for. especially here, because you're not paying anything extra for this. This is a bonus if you're a member of the Y, isn't it? Yeah. Maybe that's what I should start to do. Maybe I should get posters that say Swami David. Right? That's what draws people, right? Swami David is teaching at the Y a special 10th session seminar for $500, only for those who understand the esoteric teachings from the East. You'd be surprised how many people would sign up for something like that, because they figure it must be good. Swami, it's Swami. And if it's $500, well, it must be important. That's how it works. It really does. That's why I've often said, if there was a poster out there on the wall that Eckhart Tolle was going to be teaching this class, you wouldn't be able to get in here. But David Parrish, who gives a shit? It's true, isn't it?
He's a better marketer.
And one of their teachers that talks about this wrote a book called The Diamond in Your Pocket. In other words, you have a truth that's there all the time, readily available to you, and you totally ignore it. Right? And this truth is just like that. Okay, have a good night.